All over the world, countries and corporations have committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. In fact, up to 70% of companies in major industries, like road vehicles, cement, and electricity, have announced net zero targets. But what does that even mean? I, for one, net zero every time I try to play basketball. But that's neither here nor there. Nor in the basket. But I can nerd-splain to you that being carbon neutral means reaching no net carbon emissions. For that, we'd need to both reduce emissions and offset the ones we can't avoid by extracting carbon from the air. And just like my basketball training, it's going to take a lot of work. We'll need some crafty solutions, plus a good way of measuring decarbonization. Because the solutions marketed as green or eco-friendly don't always tell the whole story. Hi, I'm M. Jackson, and this is Crash Course Climate and Energy. In episodes 5 and 6, we learned about biofuels, versatile fuels that can help fill the gaps in decarbonizing heating and transportation. Biofuels are liquid fuel substitutes, often made from plants, and in theory, they're carbon neutral by nature. That's because these plants have only recently removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere via photosynthesis. So when the biofuels are burned, it returns the carbon the plants recently removed from the system. Burning biofuels is like returning a friend's shirt that you borrowed a week ago. You're not adding to their wardrobe when you return it. You're just kind of putting it back. On the other hand, when we burn traditional fossil fuels, we're releasing carbon that's been locked up for millions of years. And that's enough to seriously change the balance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's not like returning a shirt you borrowed last week. It's like returning a pile of clothes you borrowed in preschool. And now, your friend's closet is overflowing and they really don't need those kid-sized overalls. Because biofuels seem so much better than fossil fuels by comparison, they're already a big part of our lives. If you live in the US, at least 10% of the gas you pump into your car is probably not gasoline at all. It's likely corn ethanol biofuel. Corn ethanol is an alcohol made by fermenting the starch in corn, and it's been added to gas for several decades to help minimize the emissions from transportation. So, following that logic, it doesn't seem like it'd be too big of a leap to replace all our fossil fuels with biofuels and decarbonize transportation in one fell swoop. Except, growing corn and turning it into biofuel takes a lot of energy. You have to clear huge areas of land, douse it with fertilizer, harvest and transport your corn with heavy machinery, and then process it in specially made facilities. All of these steps involve fossil fuels. It's such an energy-intensive process that you barely get the same energy out that you put in. Kind of like making a really complicated celery dish. It takes a long time, and you're still hungry at the end. And because each step releases greenhouse gases, the emissions from making this carbon-neutral biofuel can be higher than the emissions from burning gasoline. When you add up the carbon emissions of everything involved in a product like this, it's called carbon accounting. And just like regular accounting helps you subtract losses from profits to understand the total picture, carbon accounting helps us figure out the total emissions involved in making and using something. But it's not as easy as opening a spreadsheet or checking your bank account. Take something even simpler than the fuel that powers your car. Imagine, say, a single car door. Let's head to the thought bubble. Over at the car door factory, business is booming. Car Doors R Us is buying iron and coal to manufacture shiny steel doors. Then, they're selling those doors to a car company who will assemble a vehicle to sell to a consumer like you or me. In line with worldwide trends, Car Doors R Us is committed to a goal of net zero emissions. And they seem on track. They're buying more efficient furnaces so they don't have to burn as much coal. And they're advertising their processes greener than their competitors. Except, the way they measure emissions is flawed. If they're using the current standard emissions measuring practice, called the GHG protocol, Car Doors R Us probably isn't counting all the emissions from their raw material providers. For example, it may not include things like emissions from the trucks that deliver their raw sheet steel, or the electricity used by the factory that produced it. That makes it hard for consumers who care about climate change to make informed decisions. And it makes it harder for everyone to accurately measure our progress towards carbon neutrality. So economists are now working to develop better ways of carbon accounting such as e-liability accounting. In this system, the emissions follow a product from start to finish. Think about a stray dog that follows you home. Stick with me here. It's going to make sense in a minute. When Car Doors R Us buys raw materials, it's not just buying iron and coal. It's also acquiring responsibility. Like when you found out, you had to walk and train the dog, not just love on it. But for Car Doors R Us, the responsibility is for the emissions involved in mining and transporting the raw materials. After that, the company adopts more stray dogs or picks up more liability as they generate emissions during the manufacturing process. But when they sell that finished door, they pass on the liability to the car company and ultimately to you, the consumer. So at that point, you might actually receive a report card on the quantity of emissions involved in your car to date. And hopefully it has a better score than the one doggy daycare sent home. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, a company like Car Doors R Us is doing their best with carbon accounting. But sometimes companies promote their products as being green or carbon neutral while intentionally not counting parts of the production process. When this happens, it's part of a phenomenon called corporate greenwashing, where companies make misleading claims about how green their business is. And it can show up in marketing for products that use supposedly carbon neutral biofuels, like ethanol. But that doesn't mean that all biofuels are secretly high carbon. For instance, there is a kind of green fuel that looks pretty good, even with your accounting goggles on. Cellulosic Biofuels from a plant called switchgrass. Here, the energy in the biofuel comes from breaking down long, durable molecules of cellulose instead of starch. And unlike corn, switchgrass is a plant that's native to the North American prairie. So the ground doesn't need to be intensively plowed and fertilized for it to grow. That means you can get close to 5 times the energy from switchgrass biofuel than you put into making it. Less like a celery sorbet, more like a protein bowl. But because of those hardy cellulose fibers, converting switchgrass into a biofuel isn't as easy as making it from corn, and the technology and infrastructure are still lagging behind. So if you're interested in agriculture or engineering or even politics, since new technologies often need political support, this kind of thing is a gap you might step into. Because like I've said before, climate change is a group project that needs all kinds of thinkers. And the future isn't set in stone. There is still time to develop switchgrass processing technology and other solutions for biofuels that might go easy on the emissions. There are other strategies as well for getting closer to net zero emissions. There's a side of the coin where we release less emissions in the first place. And then there's the side of the coin where we try to clean up the ones we've already let loose. That side is called carbon capture. The idea is that in the cases where it's not possible to avoid emissions entirely, we capture the greenhouse gases before they heat up our atmosphere. One method of doing this is called point source carbon capture. It's just what it sounds like. It captures emissions where they're emitted. Basically, it's a carbon filter that's installed directly onto a chimney or an outlet of a power plant or factory. It's like the air filter on your furnace or AC unit, but instead of stopping allergens or pollutants from getting into your home, this filter stops greenhouse gases from reaching the atmosphere. This method could capture emissions at the source from processes like concrete production, which are difficult to decarbonize. And point source carbon capture may even be able to bring the factories where ethanol is made closer to true net zero emissions. But tilling land, shipping car doors, mining iron, greenhouse gas emissions like these are a lot harder to capture right at the source because they're much more spread out. And that's where direct air capture comes in. This method pulls greenhouse gases straight out of the air, regardless of where they were emitted. This system takes in air from the atmosphere, then passes it through special filters or chemical mixtures to remove the carbon altogether. It sounds kind of magical, because not only can it capture carbon from anywhere, it could even partially undo the damage that's been done over the last couple of centuries. This could theoretically take levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere back to pre-industrial levels. Unfortunately, direct air capture is stubbornly difficult and expensive. Right now, there's more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere than there has been in millennia. But our atmosphere is huge, and greenhouse gases only make up a tiny portion. That's why we use the unit of parts per million when talking about the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Today in 2023, there are around 420 molecules of carbon dioxide for every million molecules of air. So you have to filter a lot of air to capture any significant amount of greenhouse gases. That means direct air carbon capture is really inefficient. Imagine you were looking for one specific shell that you dropped in the ocean. You're sorting through thousands that aren't what you're looking for, and it's taking forever. Except it's millions of shells that we need to recapture from a space a lot bigger than the ocean. Cost-wise, it's much cheaper to capture the gases when they're concentrated at the emission source. Unfortunately, that means that our historical emissions are probably here to stay, at least for a while. There's no silver bullet for climate change here, which hopefully isn't surprising at this point. I mean, we want to bury that bombshell in episode 7. Plus, once you've captured the carbon with methods like these, you still have to figure out what to do with it. So researchers are exploring various storage solutions, a lot of which are pretty rocky, literally. One option is to inject gases into the sediments at the bottom of the ocean, where they'll be held in place by the crushing pressure of thousands of kilograms of seawater. Alternatively, the carbon could be stored in actual rocks. Ironically, it'd be stored in the holes left behind after miners extracted fossil fuels, the same fuels that started this problem in the first place. Right now, though, there's no single storage solution that's watertight, or airtight even. Another possibility is not to let the carbon go to waste. We could use what's captured to make things like fuel and chemicals. This may only be a short-term solution if the carbon ends up back in the atmosphere eventually, but it is much cheaper than locking up the gases for eternity. So, if we might slip on our carbon accounting goggles one more time, carbon capture promises great things. On the face of it, it could even lead us down a path to negative carbon emissions. But the current status of carbon capture technology would likely only help us reduce our annual carbon emissions by about 3.5 billion tons by 2050. That's a huge amount, but no match when compared to the 51 billion tons of emissions we release each year. So there's a lot of room for scientists, engineers, investors, economists, communication professionals, maybe you, to get involved in this part of the problem and its possible solutions. In the end, climate change will require a whole host of solutions. Avoiding greenhouse gas emissions where possible, yes, but also, where that's not possible, alternatives like biofuels and carbon capture can take us a long way towards carbon neutrality by 2050. Plus, with accurate carbon accounting, companies can make sure their emission goals are really on the right track. That'll become more important than ever as the effects of climate change are being felt around the world. We'll get into that story next time. Special thanks to Indija-ka, our basketball coach for this episode. Thanks to you, I can now score a three-pointer. Don't make me prove it. We'll get there eventually. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. Crash Course Climate and Energy is produced by Complexly, with support provided by Breakthrough Energy and Gates Ventures. This episode was filmed at Castle Garrity Studio and was made with the help of all of these nice people. If you want to help keep Crash Course free for everyone, forever, you can join our community on Patreon.